The Outsider podcast shares the opinions and analyses of Drew Landry. They are his thoughts, and his thoughts alone, and do not necessarily reflect every member of his audience or newsletter readers. Now, on with the show.
Welcome in to another episode of the Outsider Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Drew Landry. Folks, thank you so much for joining the program wherever you are listening, whenever you are listening. Appreciate you dropping in to get the outsider's perspective on so many things. This is the best politics podcast west of I-35 in the great state of Texas, where I tackle not only Texas issues, but also national. And so with that in mind, let's start this thing off. I get into the walk around the bases, the trot around the bases, and my main topic today has to do with how Texas Republicans, mainly the House Republicans, are going to handle Ken Paxton if he becomes the nominee for U.S. Senate. So that said, let's get into our trot around the bases, and in our first trot down to first base, it's inflation. This was one of the big stories that was dropped to us just last week. Inflation soared in March to a whopping 3.3%. And so during the 31-day third month of our year, prices rose 0.9%, almost a whole percent. This is the highest jump in prices in 4 years, and the highest inflation has been in almost 2 years. And you may wonder, well, why? Well, you could also guess why. It's the energy prices. More specifically, it's gasoline. If we quote the Washington Post, because they ran a story, really all the major media outlets did. This is a quote straight from the big headline story as it reads: energy prices in the Consumer Price Index jumped about 11% last month, the largest monthly increase in more than 20 years, fueled by a 21.2% increase in the price of gas, which was the biggest jump in the history of the index. Now, and you may wonder, well, why is that? Well, you know why. Iran. We go back to the story. The conflict in Iran has fueled a rapid rise in the cost of oil and refined petroleum products, including gasoline and diesel, with ripple effects spreading into fertilizers and other goods whose production or transport depend on fossil fuels. This renewed inflation surge will intensify pressure on the Trump administration, which has made tackling high prices a central political promise. The White House on Friday said the spike reflects temporary energy disruptions. Oh, that's a nice term. From the conflict, and pointed to a falling prices for eggs, beef, prescription drugs, dairy, as evidence that the president's broader economic agenda is working. All right, the administration said it remains focused on keeping oil supplies moving through the Strait of Hormuz. This is a quote straight from a White House spokesman, Kush Desai. It says, as the administration ensures the free flow of energy through the Strait of Hormuz, the American economy remains on a solid trajectory thanks to the administration's robust supply-side agenda of tax cuts, deregulation, and energy abundance. Well, to be fair, I mean, inflation, core inflation, which removes the volatile food and energy prices, that rose 0.2%. 0.2%. And that's okay. I mean, that's really not a bad rise. But the entire formula here, the entire reporting on inflation is going to be felt throughout the entire year. And that's what's suggested by all the expert economists. Desai, who spoke for the White House on prices, boy, he posted a whopper of a lie on X Nearly everything he suggested was false or misleading, which is pretty typical. Um, all you have to do is look at his posts, copy paste, and simply do a Google search on what was true, and you're not going to find a whole lot of anything that was actually true. So, inflation is up. The president said that he was going to bring inflation down. That hasn't happened. He said, energy prices would go down. Well, energy prices have gone up. So, we're we're over 400 days, getting into 450 days in his second term, and it's just like the first term. Over promise, under performance, and that stink is gonna stay on the Republicans in this midterm year unless something changes. Unless something changes. We all know all this stuff is fluid. Nothing is actually like is just in concrete. Things can change. We know that. All right. That's first base. Let's move on here to second base. The Texas Public Policy Foundation had held its annual convention, and that was this past week, and it had a whole slew of keynote guests. They're going to give these little pep talks, and one was the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, and he issued essentially a veiled warning that Democrats could win in November. What a concept. But what he said, though, the way that he phrased this made the crowd and viewers really clutch their pearls. He said Republicans would have a tough time keeping the Texas House. And that made everybody raise an eyebrow, like, The Rock, and be like, really? Really? And so that particular saying, that whole line got the attention of Texas House Speaker Dustin Burrows, who, well, he did a whole nothing to see here type of a routine whenever he took the stage the next day. Reported by the Dallas Morning News, at least that's where I got the story, the House Speaker suggested that they will keep the House because he's seen the numbers. He's looked at them. There's no need to worry about the Texas House. And, okay, to be fair, the Democrats taking control of the House really is a tall order. And we're talking about the Texas House of Representatives, folks, not the U.S. House, not Congress. We're talking about the Lone Star State's legislature. And this would be a tall order because they would need to capture 14 seats. They would need a net gain of 14. For those of you who don't know, there's 150 seats in the Texas House. And in order to get a majority is half plus 1. 150 is an even number. Even numbers are divisible by 2. So half of 150 is 75, plus 1 is 76. There's currently 62 seats in the Texas House of Representatives, and in order for the Democrats to gain a majority, they would need to gain 14 seats. The Democrats haven't had control of the House since 2001. All right. The Republicans captured the Texas House in the 2002 midterm, and they were able to take over the Texas House in 2003, and so they've been in control of Texas for 23 years, going on 24 years, and they think everything's going to be fine, but House Speaker Burrows is really waving his hands around, being like Officer Barbrady from South Park, nothing to see here. And I tend to believe that. I tend to believe that Republicans are going to hold on to the Texas House. I mean, doing so it's easier to defend those seats because they're so gerrymandered, just to be clear. But the Lieutenant Governor is trying to do something. And Burrows is, well, he's pouring cold water on it. And what Burrows is doing here is he is really just throwing a wet blanket on the whole idea of trying to build a motivating factor. All right. Patrick is issuing this warning to motivate the people in the room, to get them out to vote, to get them active. Usually if you go to a convention, that's your activism is not really going to be questioned because diehards go to these things. But he's issuing a dire warning, he being Lieutenant Governor Patrick, issuing a dire warning in hopes that these diehards share all this stuff, and he's trying to get all this buzz about, hey, the lieutenant governor thinks the House is just going to be wrecked. They're going to lose their majority, and he did that for a purpose. I mean, whether or not we like Lieutenant Governor Patrick and his governing style is irrelevant to this point. He's a really good politician. He really is. And he knows how to motivate people. He's never lost an election. So he knows exactly what it takes to keep this fire going. So what he's trying to do is generate buzz, get Democrats and their hopes up, and then hopefully, for his point, get all of those who are motivated to vote to get others motivated to vote. He's trying to generate buzz to get Republicans and those who lean Republican out to vote in this midterm election. This would have been more effective if he did this in like September or maybe even August, to where people are now starting to pay attention and oh yeah, really got to do this right now. And so, but now they've got some time to think about it, got some time to even forget about it. So the timing of this is a little in question. But let's understand that House Speaker Burrows took this very personal. All right. And he viewed this as a jab. All right. So Burrows thinks that Lieutenant Governor Patrick is jabbing at him at his own leadership style, and was very quick to say, hey, everything's fine here. You're being very undued, to reference the big Lebowski. And so Burrows has a misinterpretation of this remark. And so his whole reaction here gives Democrats the political cover that they were looking for and that they needed. And that's to keep their head down and keep campaigning. If Burrows wouldn't have said this, if he would have said, yeah, it's looking pretty tough, that would have fed into this. That would have fed into what the lieutenant governor was trying to do, which was motivate people to come out to vote. And he was using motivation of fear. All right, that was Lieutenant Governor Patrick's whole plan: motivation through fear, and not like, man, we're doing a good job and we just need to keep doing this. That was what Burrows is doing. I mean, he says, hey, look, I've seen the numbers. We're keeping the House. I don't really think that was a wise move on his behalf, but it's because he took it personally. All right, he thought that, well, of course, it's my chamber. I'm going to stay as House Speaker. But this is just like Burrows. I mean, this is just like his leadership style. He, to get to the highest of highs, only to see himself get to the lowest of lows within a short amount of time. This happened in 2019, and we've seen this happen to him throughout his career. That's second base. Let's move on here to third base. Marjorie Taylor Greene, former Congresswoman from Georgia, she left the Congress in January of this year, just a couple months ago. And there has to be some sort of a special election, and so the governor of Georgia called for one. And, of course, this was a pretty safe Republican district. No one was really arguing that the Democrat would win. But the Republican won, but not as big as he should have. Yes, it was a special election. Yes, it was a runoff election. All that happened. And usually when those happen, turnout is pretty low. But this sort of runoff did something that you wouldn't really see. It actually caused more voters to come out to participate than in the special election. And we actually saw the Democrat get a higher percentage than ever before. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, when she won those seats, I mean, she won big. I mean, the Democrat might have gotten 30, 31, 32% of the vote. But in this, I mean, the Democrat got close to 45% of the vote. This was a ballpark in it, okay? This was a pretty eye-opening moment here that people are voting for the Democrat in MTG's old district. 45%? What is going on? If you're a Republican, this is a telltale sign. It's a telltale sign. This is the motivating factor for Democrats. They are pulling together. They are pushing up a boulder up a hill, and it looks like they're getting the momentum to get that boulder up there. Now let's remember, let's not make too much of this. This is still April. That election is less than 7 months away. Let's all be honest here. Let's all just take a deep breath and realize what's going on. But momentum, it really cannot be denied here. You look at Texas District 19, which is where I live. It's really not all that different than District 14. I mean, yes, there are probably more Democrats living in there, but if a Democrat can get 45, close to 45% in a special election, in a Trump plus 38, nearly 40% district, like the 14th district up in Georgia, that could foreshadow what November would look like. And that same goes for West Texas. I think Democrats, if this continues, Democrats are looking to have a better night than what they originally thought. Now we come home. We're going to cross home plate here, and the President Donald Trump is, you're probably not going to be too surprised by this, is not leading Congress. He's not giving them things to do. He's letting Congress be Congress, and that has led them to be, well, Congress. I love to tell this joke in my classes. If con is the opposite of pro, then what's the opposite of progress? Well, Congress. So, and so there's a logjam here on the government's first branch. What we're seeing take place is they can't get together on things that they want. Like the House and Senate are both ran by the same party, and they're having a problem getting things through. They're having a problem agreeing on what to do. And we're talking about issues that sometimes mostly are kitchen table issues, like housing affordability. While the president doesn't think that that's a big deal, a lot of people do. And even the Republicans are seeing this and going, we probably need to do something about that. How to do it, they haven't come up with an idea yet. Aviation safety is another issue that they're looking to the president to lead them on, and he's not really doing it. We've read some stories here in the past few weeks of some near-death, if not death, experiences of airlines and airplanes coming close to one another, or even having terrible experiences on the runway. I mean, aviation safety is a concern. Now, it is safe to fly. I don't want to say that it isn't, but this is a concern that the Republicans are not addressing because they have no leadership. The name, image, and likeness issue of college athletes. This is something that is trying to be addressed by Congress. The president loves college sports. He loves college football. He doesn't really have the patience for anything else. So he's trying to really trying to navigate how NIL, name, image, and likeness, how much can be paid and the type of regulation of payment through this what's called the SCORE Act. All right, so that's something that Congress is just kind of bumfuzzled about. Then of course, you have AI. There's this technological attempt to regulate AI. More federal than state, or some say more state than federal, whatever the case is. We're seeing more and more AI databases pop up throughout the country, and you're also seeing some resistance from that. So that needs to pay attention to the headline as well. But the president is nowhere on AI. He just kind of says a few things and then dozes off in a public meeting. And then finally, you have the SAVE Act. Well, I shouldn't say finally. You have the SAVE Act, of course, whatever. I've talked about this. You can find my writings on this. I don't need to go really deep into any deeper issue about it, other than the fact that it looks like it's dead on arrival. And because of that, you're seeing Republicans get upset about it because they can't agree on what to do, and there's constant running around and unsure as to what should happen with this. Now, this is the last thing, is funding for the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. Funding for this, House and Senate, they're right there, like two rams pounding each other in the head. They can't figure out what to do. And you would think the president, the leader of their party, might be able to come in and say, "Hey, look, you guys got to figure this out. We need to come up with some sort of a deal here." Um, he's nowhere. All right, he's nowhere on this. He's more talking about trying to do 3D chess and trying to bomb Iran off the face of the map. That's what he's concerned with. I mean, so in the name of safety, which we know that it really isn't that. Okay, that, folks, is the trot around the bases. That is the four big stories that I thought were important for us to look at throughout the week. Now, what I want us to look at is the main topic for this episode, and what that is how the House of Representatives in the Texas legislature is going to have to, I don't know, find some way to thread a needle as to whether or not to support the nominee who for U.S. Senate who might be Ken Paxton, or defend their impeachment vote. And so let us remember a few things here when we discuss this whole impeachment, discuss Ken Paxton's issues. We have to put all this into a little bit of context. And so let's remember here that on May 27th, of 2023, which was the 138th day of the 140-day legislative session. So 2 days left into the legislative session in 2023, the Texas House of Representatives voted to impeach Ken Paxton 121 to 23. 121 House members in favor of impeachment to 23 who were against impeachment. This rare bipartisan tandem of 61 Democrats and 60 Republicans from the lower chamber found the evidence brought forward from the House General Investigating Committee concerning Attorney General Paxton's behavior while in office, while in official capacity, to be a breach of public trust. And according to House Resolution 2377, he, being Ken Paxton, engaged in abuse of power, grave official misconduct, and corruption. All of those charges, folks, all of them, are high crimes and misdemeanors. This was probably the most consequential vote the House took in some time. And the courage the 121 members had that day were well on display. If you ask those members who took the vote, this wasn't something they did lightly. So that's why this was such a burdensome and also a consequential vote. The Senate, however, did not share that view. In all reality, the impeachment trial ended before it even started. And that's because Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick accepted a $3 million donation. Now, that $3 million was combined, but it was from the same group. And that group was Defend Texas Liberty PAC. You know who that PAC favors? Ken Paxton. So the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, he still to this day defends accepting those donations because he will say that he received money from Paxton's critics. Well, that I also accepted money from people who didn't like him. But what makes this stink to high heaven is the timing and the scale of these contributions, because they speak for themselves. Because any reasonable person, any rational person would look at that and go, well, he was bought off. The lieutenant governor was immediately bought off. And so this whole conversation, this whole issue of the impeachment, that vote that the House members took, was within a matter of a $3 million bribe tossed to the side. I wrote about this twice when it happened 3 years ago. And quite honestly, nothing since then has really changed my mind. The House took the correct action in impeaching the Attorney General. But they saw months of their investigations and the attempts at justice just wither away, so that the lieutenant governor, so Dan Patrick, could benefit politically and financially. Now, folks, that's the reason Kim Paxton was acquitted of impeachment. You'll have some commentators say, well, the evidence wasn't there. You'll have some people say, well, the arguments that the prosecution made weren't good. That's a load of malarkey. That's not even close to being true. There's other things that have happened here that I'm not even mentioning. Like, of the 20 charges that the House approved to bring these against Paxton, several of them were dismissed by the Senate. They said, we're not going to accept this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. And their reasoning was that those are being dealt with currently at a criminal court level. So there's a legal issue with this. We're not going to hear it during this impeachment trial because this is not a criminal court. This is a political court. So they're not going to hear the actual crimes that the man committed. They're not going to hear any of those things. All they want to do is just deal with charges that they can pick apart and argue that there's no evidence for them. That is another example of why this whole impeachment trial was over before it started. And then they weren't even enforcing their own rules. They made a vote before the session ended. They, being the Texas Senate, made a vote that Kim Paxton would have to sit throughout the entire trial, that he would have to show up every day for the trial. He would have to sit there and be present. And he wasn't. And when this was brought up to Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick's face, he just said, it's really no big deal. He doesn't really need to be here. You want to tell me that $3 million bribe didn't mean anything? And folks, I have no problem calling it that. Usually I have a bit of an issue calling, in this context, a bribe. Usually I have an issue with that. Not this time. This was, without question, a heist. And the one who drove the heist wasn't Tony Busby, who was Paxton's defense attorney. It wasn't Kim Paxton himself. It was the lieutenant governor. And in the trunk of the car that he drove in this heist was a big bag that contained $3 million. This was, without question, a bigger scandal than the actual scandal. I mean, the lieutenant governor ought to be up for charges of impeachment. He ought to be impeached for this. When you really think about it, when you really consider the gravity of this donation acceptance, you would think somebody with the political mind of Dan Patrick, that he wouldn't do something like this. That he would say, this isn't going to look good. But he didn't care. He thought, I've taken money from people who don't like him. Well, we know who won out here. What is very clear is that those who don't like Kim Paxton didn't give enough money. That's it. Period. The end. So the acquittal of Kim Paxton had next to nothing to do with the arguments made by the prosecution. Not a daggone thing. Had everything to do with Lieutenant Governor Patrick being bribed. He was bought off. We shouldn't call him Lieutenant Governor Patrick. We should call him Lieutenant Governor Judas. aside from that, because there's a bigger political issue than what happened 3 years ago. And that bigger issue is, what will those 60 Republicans do who voted to impeach Kim Paxton? Where do they stand in his campaign for U.S. Senate? Because, folks, there's some recent polling to suggest that this scandal-prone candidate, this candidate who commits more self-forced errors than maybe the worst shortstop ever or the worst infielder ever. Looking at you, Mark Bellhorn. That this guy is probably going to win the Republican nomination. And he's going to be the Republican Party's nominee for U.S. Senate. That's what the polling suggests. And so, if that's to happen, what will those Texas House Republicans do? And that includes Texas House Speaker Dustin Burrows, by the way. Now, let's remember, he was at that, as I mentioned earlier in the trot around the bases, he was at the conference for the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which, time out, by the way, that's a far-right fringe, think tank. All right, these are a bunch of goofballs who say some words and think they're being smart. They're not. They say they have the weirdest ideas, yet they have the ears of the most powerful people. That's why they're even important. But Burrows was at that convention, and he says, we all got to unite around that particular candidate, whoever it is. Whoever it's Paxton or Cornyn, we all got to come together. He didn't really say that in the most enthusiastic manner. Because that's my question here. Will he be aggressive? Will he be an aggressive campaigner for Ken Paxton? Because Paxton is going to be carrying their flag. He's going to be the new standard bearer for the Texas Republicans. And that ought to weigh on the minds of Texas Republicans. Ken Paxton is your new leader for this election. I mean, I'm fairly convinced, until I see otherwise, Paxton's going to win the runoff. And that sucks for John Cornyn because I don't always agree with what he's done, but at least he's led with some integrity here. I mean, there is a sense of a moral core with John Cornyn. As you know, as I've said, I don't know how many times on this podcast and in my articles, there is no moral core for Ken Paxton. Right? His moral core is found with a stripper's pole. I mean, this is just, he that's where he is. That's who the Republicans are probably going to nominate for this seat. And for a party that is so built on, now they want to say Christendom, Western civilization, morality, Christian values, this guy has nothing of it. And you want to say that this is going to be your guy? Well, he's more conservative, Drew. He's more conservative. More conservative. I don't know how you get more conservative than John Cornyn. So you're mad about the vote that he took about giving states that have red flag laws money. You're mad about that. 3 words for you. Get over it. But look, that's if you want to win. That's if you want to win. You want to make this thing a competitive race. You want to make this to where you're going to lose. Buddy, you make it all about Ken Paxton. You make him your nominee. As I said last time, and I'm always going to say this, and as I'm not letting up on the gas on this. You want to have a character debate with James Tallarico? Ken Paxton doesn't want to have that conversation. But that's my question to the Texas House Republicans, to the 60 House Republicans who voted to impeach this guy. Where will you stand when he wins your primary, when he wins your runoff? Where will you stand on it? Let's also know that since this went to the Senate, there were 2 Senate Republicans who voted to convict Paxton. There were 2 of them. Right? One is Senator Robert Nichols, who is retiring, and the other is former state Senator Kelly Hancock, who is not coming back to the legislature either. Neither Hancock nor Nichols will be in the legislature come 2027. And you know what he's done? He being Paxton, he's already gone after Kelly Hancock. Now, where Hancock is at this moment, he is the acting controller of public accounts for the state of Texas. That's a statewide elected position in our state. And Glenn Hagar, he was the controller before. He left to become the chancellor at Texas A&M. I guess that's a better paying gig. So that's where he went. So Greg Abbott, Governor Abbott appointed Kelly Hancock to be the acting controller. And so Hancock ran for a term of his own in this last primary, and there were about 3 or 4 people in there, and he lost. He lost. He did not get into the runoff. I mean, I don't think there is going to be a runoff. I think Don Huffines, who's a flat out racist, he's the Republican nominee. Go figure. So during this time period where Hancock is acting as the controller, all right, he's in that spot. Paxton's already gone after him. Paxton likes to bully others around. I mean, he's already urged Governor Abbott to remove Hancock from that position and to appoint Don Huffines, who's the GOP nominee. And we all know the reason for this. It has nothing to do with Hancock's ability to do the job. It's not about competence. It has everything to do with the vote to convict. It's always been about that, folks. It's always been about that. Has nothing to do with doing the actual job, because if it did, then Paxton wouldn't be doing this. Now, Abbott's kind of shrugged it off and is like, whatever. Paxton's going to make his whole conversation about his campaign here. He's going to make a campaign stance on things, and that's fine, But it has nothing to do, not a single thing to do with him doing the job. It has everything to do with the fact that Kelly Hancock and Robert Nichols voted to convict Kim Paxton of the impeachment charges. And Paxton is vindictive. And he wants revenge. Interesting. So when we talk about campaigns, it's good to remember that campaigns are a place to solidify support for a particular candidate. And it was recently reported that sitting U.S. Senator and senior U.S. Senator of Texas, John Cornyn, raked in numerous endorsements from Texas elected officials. And one of those endorsements came from Lubbock State Senator Charles Perry. I mentioned this in the last one, and I kind of guessed as to why Perry was doing this. And it turns out I was more correct than I was wrong. A lot of it has to do with the fact that Paxton doesn't have the right character for Perry to want to support. But Senator Perry was not the only one who did this. There was a whole host of other elected officials in both Congress and in the legislature who were on Team Cornyn. But most of those people who are on Team Cornyn, voted to either impeach him or convict the Attorney General. Think about that. So again, we're right back to the core question that I want that needs to be asked and that these lawmakers must confront, folks. They have to deal with this. For those who found Paxton as a threat to public service, guilty of corruption, and an untrustworthy public official in 2023, will they suddenly find him suitable and worthy of public trust to be a U.S. Senator in this upcoming election, in this midterm? Are they going to go to the stump for him? Are they going to be there to say, John Cornyn is not the right guy, Kim Paxton's the right man, and then go into the summer and the fall, we got to elect Kim Paxton, he's a good man? How can they say that with a straight face? I don't think you can. But that's the risk that the Republicans take when nominating Paxton. Because his potential opponent, if Paxton is the nominee, then his opponent is the complete opposite of him. The Democratic nominee is State Rep James Tallarico, and he carries none of that baggage, folks. Not a single bit of it. This is a guy who has a deeply religious background. And let's also know this. Tallarico agreed with 60 House Republicans that Paxton was unfit for service. So there's no moral high ground here. And so that's the conundrum that Texas Republican lawmakers are going to have to confront. And the media has to ask them this. You have to hold their feet to the fire. Now, let's be clear. When they go on their, these House Republicans who are up for re-election and they're going to go on their media tours, they don't want to answer this question. And the media in their areas as to where they will go will honor that request. They're not going to ask them, hey, look, you're part of this 60-vote people in the Republican Party who voted to impeach Paxton. Is he your guy? Well, then if he's your guy, then what did you find that was wrong with him? Well, if you think that it was wrong with him then, is he suddenly an about face now? Did he have a road to Damascus with you? Like, did you see him just now you see him in a different light? We all know what the answer will be. It won't be any of that. It'll be all about maintaining power. So if these Texas House Republicans say, yeah, that's water under the bridge, he's our nominee now, and we just have to unite behind him. That is saying to you that they are putting party above country, party above state, because they have nothing else. And they're also telling you that impeachment vote meant nothing. That the courage that they showed in late May of 2023 doesn't mean a hill of beans today. Doesn't mean anything in 2026. No. Well, I think it does. You probably can guess that. I don't think I just, shattered the earth with that particular statement. But it's quite clear to me that, and it should be clear to anybody, either you're going to support the choice you made 3 years ago, or you're going to say, screw that. It doesn't, it didn't mean anything then, doesn't mean anything now. He's our guy. I mean, in all honesty, Paxton should get like maybe 39% of the vote. Like, for real. But because the way we vote is very partisan and we cling to our party identification, all this is political science, folks. I'm not telling you anything that isn't already known. He's going to get a lot more than 39% of the vote. If people actually voted for the candidate, Paxton wouldn't even be elected office. I mean, let's just understand, he's been caught with 2 affairs. That's what he's been caught with. He's been caught. And his wife finally had enough. I mean, come on. We don't know how long he's been doing this. We don't know how long he's been benefiting from all of the political donations that he's been, political donations that he's received from his wonderful real estate friend by the name of Nate Paul. How long has that been going on? I mean, why are we? I mean, this should just simply be the tip of the iceberg with this guy. But we have to remember something here. My friend and out of the University of Houston, Brandon Rottinghouse, has said, he has argued that scandals don't matter anymore. People are ho-hum about them. Except if it's monetary and if it's close and if it's been recent, like in the last year and a half. But if it was like 10 years ago, If it was 5 years ago, But if it was like 6 months ago or maybe a year ago, okay. They'll care a little bit then. If it's some sort of a marital affair and you're in the party of morality, I mean, look, everyone has a moral core here. Everyone has a key aspect of character, except for Kim Paxton. And we have found out that Lieutenant Governor Patrick, we've been knowing this for a while, he only cares about power too. There's no moral core about him. So it's quite clear that all of this is about power. They are willing to put party over state, party over country, because they have some sort of a issue with James Tallarico. And you go, well, what is that? Well, it's things he said, 5, 6, 7 years ago. He follows women on Instagram. And the question you should ask to that, and I've said this before, I'm not saying anything that hasn't already been repeated or that you can't find. You should look at that and go, and? Are they over 18? What's the big deal? If he's looking at their pictures that they are willingly taking and they are posting on their own page. Why is that scandalous? It's scandalous because they can't find anything else on James Tallarico. It's scandalous because they're scraping for every little thing possible because they know the big stuff isn't there. They know he has a moral core. They know he has character. They know he can quote the Bible. They know he lives by a religious core and by a religious code. They know that he can't fumble around words sometimes like I do. I mean, this is a guy who has the ability to inspire a generation. And yet these are the people who are scared of that. They don't want Kim Paxton to be the nominee. The problem is that they're mad at John Cornyn for a vote he took 3 years ago. That's what all of this is about. So, look, if the Republicans want to make Kim Paxton their nominee, go for it. I'm always going to say that, but I think what they have to do is all these people who are going to suddenly just be Kim Paxton, they need to be reminded that they at one time felt he was unfit for office, and that was not that long ago. Was not that long ago. And if they don't have a good answer for that, if they can't actually say, yeah, I thought he was bad, and I'm not really a big fan of him now, but by God, he beats the alternative, you know that's crap. You know they got nothing. That they have no moral core, they have no character, they only care about power and their party? But that is a question they have to be asked. All right. Folks, thank you so much for listening in. Appreciate you. I will be back again very, very soon, and I can't wait to talk to you then. Thanks for being here. Just a quick plug. You can find me on X. You can find me on Facebook. You can find the Outsider on X. You can follow the Outsider on YouTube. You can do all those things. Appreciate your listenership. I appreciate you reading. I appreciate your readership and your following. So thank you very much. Have a good week, and I'll see you again very, very soon.
The preceding analyses and opinions were that of Drew Landry and his alone. They did not necessarily reflect all of his podcast listeners or newsletter readers. Thank you for listening to the Outsider podcast. Be sure to follow the Outsider on X and on Facebook. Also, don't forget to sign up to be a free subscriber to his newsletter on Substack. Just look for The Outsider. We will see you again next time.